All right, we have people coming in and we welcome everyone. Very, very happy to have you here. This is let's see, it's March. So this is our third webinar in our 9 and 9 overtime series for UDL. We're excited that it's been very, very successful, popular. We will be sharing information in the chat about the other sessions. I see we have some of our friends here today, people that have been here before, and some new people. So welcome to those of you that have been here previously. We're really thrilled to have returning guests. I'm looking through the list and I see, oh my goodness, hi Lillian. I see many of our great friends. Hi Sarah, Stephanie Staffy people, Tom Tobin. How you doing, Tom? Lots of people that are returning guests. So we're thrilled that you could participate today. Rob Legary is here, and Jeanette Bernard, Paula McLean, all from Goodwin. We'll be putting information in the chat, so keep your eye on the chat. And it looks like everyone that is in the waiting room is here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, welcome to the 9 and 9 Overtime UDL 3.0 Insights. We're thrilled. We had such great response to last year's webinar series that we went overtime this year. So we're having, instead of 9, we're having 14 free webinars on UDL 3.0. And this is sponsored by the Goodwin University Institute for Learning Innovation and Center for Teaching Excellence at Goodwin University. One of the things I want to point out is that we are recording this session, so please keep your mics muted. Please use the chat. And we will again be putting information in the chat. I want to point out that right now we have a conference that's coming up in October, and the call for proposals is open. So those of you that are UDL aficionados, we really encourage you to submit a proposal. We're thrilled that this is the fourth time we're running this conference, and each year is more exciting and more successful than the one before. So again, welcome. I'm going to now introduce our speaker, if I can move my slide. And our speaker today is Anne Gagne, and she is a senior educational developer and an accessibility and inclusion specialist at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. She's going to speak to us today about biased assumptions in the way we use language and how we become ableists in how we speak and the words we choose to use. And this connects to UDL, Design Multiple Means for Representation. And you'll see on your screen, I have a little cutout of the UDL framework, specifically language and symbols, that guideline. And this is what Anne will speak about today, and she has some exciting information to share, and it's going to be very interactive. She'll use several different modes of getting us to express what we know and what we're interested in. So again, so Anne also has worked in higher ed for more than 20 years, and her main focus is accessible pedagogies and strategies, making teaching and learning inclusive of the disabled lived experience. And as Anne and I were talking before we started, that is near and dear to my heart as a person who spent 29 years in the field of disability working with infants and toddlers. So let me welcome Anne, and I am going to stop sharing my screen and let Anne get on with today's webinar. Welcome, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Okay, so let me share my screen here. Here we go. And I'm going to open the chat so that I can see the chat as I'm talking. So you should be able to see my screen. And I'm also going to put in the link to the slides for those of you that may want that link. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to see some names in the participants participants tab that I haven't seen in a really long time, and so it's nice to share space with you. There's a couple of ways that I usually start sessions, and so one of them, of course, is by giving you access to the slide deck. So I put the link in the chat. I also have a QR code if some of you want to use mobile devices instead to kind of follow along. That's there for you as well. And then the other thing that I'd like to do is something that we do fairly often here in Canada. I haven't seen it quite as much with my colleagues from the States, but maybe this will be something different that'll change a bit. Is we usually do a land acknowledgement and somewhat of a positionality statement. And so I think it's important for me to acknowledge that I'm living on the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, but I also was born and raised on the traditional land of the Abitibi-Winiaki, and this is land that's covered by the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. So I'm from, the province of Quebec. I was born and raised there in northern Quebec, where it is fairly snowy and cold for most of the year. But I do now live, as Diana was saying, in St. Catharines, which is like literally maybe 40 minutes from Buffalo. So I'm very close to the border. One of the things that we say at Brock in our land acknowledgement is that our great standard of living is really directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people. And I think it's important for us to remember that positionality, because a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today in relation to that UDL 2.4 is about awareness, right? And that positionality really informs the awareness that we have and the awareness that we want to build. And so part of that awareness building, of course, exactly. See, look, people saying like, this is where the guy from Rush is from. Yes, absolutely. So these are important things that are happening in this in the chat. So I like to do an access check before I do sessions. And so here I'm encouraging you to sort of identify and question anything about the learning environment that I can help support, or that our nice friends and CTE can help support around this session. So whether that be about technology, whether that be about the virtual space that we're in, and or the resources, or anything about the pace of the session. So if you need me to slow down or any of those kinds of things, I'd be happy to do that. I also want to do a visual description of myself. And so I am a white, queer, disabled settler woman. I have salt and pepper hair, which is more salt than pepper every day. I'm wearing dark rimmed glasses. I have a black shirt on today and a navy blazer. And I'm just happy to be here to talk to you about this. So the learning objectives for today, I have two of them. One is to analyze biased language in our teaching and learning spaces, but then also to assess some of the assumptions that we have in terms of linguistic and even nationalistic positionality in teaching and learning design. And so I think before I start with the slides and the content, one of the things that might be interesting for you to know is where this came from, right? Like where this idea came from, that when I saw the call, I say, hey, you know what? I think I should put something together for this. So as I've noted a few times already, I'm in Canada. And so I've found myself in a lot of teaching and learning spaces and a lot of UDL spaces that were really very sort of like US heavy in terms of lingo and talking and the biases that were happening there. And I found myself as a Canadian who didn't really have that same context, kind of losing the context that I needed to be able to participate. And so I said, hey, this would be a good opportunity to have a conversation about a UDL guideline and principle, and kind of give it from our own lived experience in terms of like, how do we think about the different things that we share in our spaces, so that it's not just like coming from a certain space that a lot of people will, be able to participate. And I know that I've found myself being in a lot of spaces that I've had to extricate myself from in teaching and learning spaces and UDL spaces, because I just didn't really feel like I belonged there, because the way that things were framed were not really inclusive. So I'm hoping today we can have a little bit of a conversation about that, around UDL consideration 2.4, around things like ableist language. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of monolinguistic pedagogical examples that I've come across that we can kind of work through, to hopefully leave us with this conversation around, like, how do we build trust, and what are some next steps in terms of, how do we do this work? And I have some questions and some prompts at the end that I would super love for you to add to. And I know that there's a Padlet, and we can add that information to the Padlet as well, and we can just keep generating that information to share our information and the thoughts that we have around this concept. There are some things in this presentation that might be activating for some folk, because we're going to be talking about ableist language. So I've sure to flag that as well, so that if that's something that you need to maybe walk away from for a bit, you'll be aware of that as well. So I have the chat up if you have any questions as I'm talking, and I'm going to be sharing a couple of things there. So with that, the reason why we're joining here today is about UDL consideration 2.4, right? So UDL consideration 2.4, of course, is about address biases in the use of language and symbols, right? And so, and if you go to the website, which I will show here, you will see that there's on the CAST website, there's a lot of explanation about how we think about languages and symbols, and a couple of things there. And so I've pulled in the next couple of slides, I've pulled a couple of things from that CAST website that I'd like to emphasize a bit, and I'm hoping that you can kind of share some of your thoughts and ideas with that. So I noticed that one of the things in there, it says, quote, for example, people in the United States speak more than 350 languages, and the federal government does not designate any official language. And then I felt really tempted to put like a Price is Right losing horn on this slide as I put it together, because of course that is now no longer true, because apparently there is a designation of official languages. But I think that it really says something about how quickly things can change in the spaces that we're in, right? Like, and how quickly, like, something that was just done like not even a year ago now, or a few months ago, in fact, is like, again, needs to be edited in a little bit. One of the things that it says as well is that a hierarchy of language emerges with standard English on top. And so one of the things that I want to talk about in this session is, like, what do you think about when you think of standard English, and what does that mean to you, right? Because there are many people that are joining here, and I'd be really curious to see like what your meaning of what your understanding of a standard English is as well. So let's talk about that a bit. So one of the things that I want to start with is like, well, what is standard English, right? And so my question to you is like, what is standard English to you? So if you feel comfortable, share in the chat. What do you, when I say standard English, what do you think about? What comes to mind when you hear the words standard English? Because I know that some of you might even be like myself, teach professional communications or English. What do you think about when you think standard English? As a native English speaker and someone who doesn't know any other language, I assume the English that I speak is the standard English. Yeah, exactly. Which is very biased, and I recognize that. Yeah, formal English with proper grammar. That's interesting. So this idea of formal, what is formal? What is proper? Newscaster English, right? So like, what do we hear on the news? Absolutely. Alina saying there's no such thing. And yes, I'm going to talk about that too, because that's one of the things that I do have a conversation about with my students, about how there is no such thing as standard English. English used in the media or in academe, academic writing as formal or standard English, absolutely. The context of the different inner circles in the countries that you're in, right? So whether you be in the US, the UK, South Africa, Australia, no grammatical errors or, North American lingo with no accent in quotation marks, if that's even a thing. Because I know that some of you, I'm sure, as you're listening to me, you're waiting for the abouts and the abouts. So the English that I'm speaking in the space that I'm currently at, that's amazing. Thanks, Shirley. That's really good. Like that context is there. Yeah, Tom, as the person with the same background as me, standard English is a prescriptive term that denotes grammar and usage patterns. That's usually like standard US or British or Canadian or Trinidadian English. Absolutely. Amazing. So thank you for that. So I think one of the things that's come out of this conversation in the chat is that standard English is really contextual. That standard English is contextual to both the geographic space that you're in, but also to, who you're interacting with and so on, right? And so, as it says in UDL 2.4, this hierarchy of language emerges with standard English on top. And I know that for me, when I see that, I see a hierarchy of language emerges with standard American English on top, right? Because that's what I see, or that's what I've encountered in the sort of teaching and learning UDL accessibility or accessible pedagogy spaces that I've been in. And so one of the things that I want to emphasize, which some of you have already put in the chat, is that standardized framings do mean that there are some positionalities that are lost and that there's unfortunately trust that's broken. I have this conversation with my students all the time because a lot of them are from like different countries, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And I tell them about how there are different kinds of Englishes, and oftentimes having a conversation about Englishes plural is refreshing to them because they've never actually had anyone explain that to them as a thing, right? So when you have these standardized framings, this loss of positionality and this loss of trust kind of says to someone like, hey, you're not my community, sadly. And it also says, I don't understand your lived experience. And so I probably don't have the ability to empathize. And so I know that this might not be the intent when we say these things. But one of the things that we're going to talk about in this session is this difference between intent and impact. And so when we use the word standardize, it does a certain kind of work. So let's see what we can do about that to kind of break down these biases that we may have, right? Because we want to acknowledge that an ethnocentric view does harm, and in some ways does reinscribe the colonial frameworks that we don't want to have in the spaces that we're in, right? Goes back to what I'm talking about in terms of doing a land acknowledgement. It goes back to the conversation that we were having before the session started about how your institution it could be understood as a Hispanic serving institution. And so we really want to like reinscribe these colonial frameworks and get rid of them, right? So some of the suggestions in UDL 2.4 as presented, and I'll put this on the slide, are to use closed captioning and sign languages where possible, right? And so I know that in Canada, whenever I'm doing a session, one of the things that I do ask is like if we have like ASL, and then Canada, we also have LSQ, which is the Langue Signée Québécois, which is the French sign language. And so that's also something that we need to take into account when we do sessions here. The other thing that 2.4 suggests is, if we want to kind of break apart some of these biases, is labeling classroom items in multiple languages. And for me, I've put a little note there that reads very like K-12 centric. And I know that one of the things I know, Tom. And I know that one of the things that I have a conversation about in the spaces that I'm in, especially around UDL, is like trying to sell people on UDL when a lot of people feel that UDL is very K to 12 centric. And then when we have something like this, for example, that, you know, if I try to tell some of the faculty, like, well, this is a thing that they suggest, and it's just like, look, I'm not teaching like, you know, grade 5. I'm not going to put labels on classroom environments, but I also know that there are some people in this room right now that might be teaching Spanish, that might be teaching French, that might be teaching Arabic, right? Like that might be doing all of those things, where labeling that kind of stuff might be helpful in their spaces, right? So that's one of the suggestions that they have there. Another suggestion is use multiple languages and dialects for communication, including speaking and writing. And so this is why I'm also like really grateful to be able to share space. I haven't done enough research, so Diana can like correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you've ever had like a nine and nine person that wasn't in the States. Am I the first non-States person? Okay, good. Yay. Fantastic. So we've had other people that were like represented, not just so that's also great. So like we're having different languages and different dialects and different ways of speaking and writing. But then there's this other one that I'd love to chat about, which is recognize that the goal of learning standard English is not assimilation or monolingualism. And so I'm left with this question, which is like, okay, so what is it then? So I guess my question back to you is, if you see a line like this that says, recognize that the goal of learning standard language is not about assimilation, it's not about creating monolinguistic frameworks, then I guess my question to you is like, well, what is it? So what's your answer to that? Why do we learn standard English? Why do we have standard English as part of our frameworks? So this idea of cultural competency, right? Colonialism, yeah. Comprehension of standard English texts. Some of you are saying because of conform. Yeah. Is that what we want? Do we want conformance? Is UDL about conformance? Because it's interesting, because I feel like UDL would probably be like the opposite of conformance, right? Like we're not here to ask people to conform. Yeah, absolutely. We learn standard anything in order to be able to have something in common, to be able to communicate with others, right? So it in some ways can create community, but as Tom says, it can also create exclusion. Absolutely. So that we can confer things in ways that both the teacher and the learner can understand. Absolutely. And then, yeah, our educational system was established at a time when reading and memorizing things was a key objective, because we didn't have little computers in our pockets all the time, right? And so now we're very much in a different frame of mind where we needed to have a baseline for that. So I think that's another thing that in the work that we do, we need to do a better job of thinking about, right? Because when people hear the word standard, they think assimilation, they think monolingual, right? But a lot of you are bringing things up in the chat that are really important, which is, hey, like, this is all about like, let's have something in common that we can talk about so that we know where to go from there and continue on, right? So thank you. I really appreciate those of you in the chat that are sharing things here. And so the next part that I want to talk about is ableist language, right? And so one of the things that 2.4 says is we should try to avoid using ableist language, and it defines ableist language as expressions that are used and terms that are associated with disabilities as pejoratives. And so this is where we're going to get to maybe a bit of some activating language for some. I'm going to start with a definition of ableism according to the Ontario Human Rights Code. So Ontario is the province that I'm living in right now. Provinces are like states. So this is like basically our statewide Human Rights Commission. And this is their definition of ableism, which is, quote, a belief system that's analogous to racism, sexism, or ageism that sees persons with disabilities as being less less worthy of respect and consideration, less able to contribute and participate, or of less inherent value than others. Ableism can be conscious or unconscious, and I think this is also something that we need to acknowledge. And it's embedded in institutions, in systems, and in the broader culture of a society, right? So this is the definition that we use in the province that I'm in. It's the definition that we use when we do accommodations for the students in our universities and colleges. And so it connects to this idea of ableist language, which is that ableist language is using a language that could be consciously or unconsciously discriminatory towards disabled folk. And so in order for us to do the hard work, we need to know what we're talking about. And like, sadly, I think we live in times in 2025 where we want to talk about a thing, but we don't actually talk about a thing. We like talk around the thing. So in an attempt to not talk around a thing and like actually see what we're talking about, this is where the content warning comes. I'm going to have a couple of slides where I'm going to ask you to use some terms that can be activating to some. If you require support or you want to talk about this further, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm really hoping that we can approach this conversation with open hearts and minds, because we need to acknowledge the words that we're talking about in order to undo the words that we're talking about, right? So that we're not just going and approaching this as checklist work, that this is continuous work, and that we know, the words that we're talking about, right? So, disabled. So here we go. In the US, disabled is a legally protected term that should be used more often to implement those legal protections. Absolutely, Lena. Yes, disability is not a bad word. Absolutely. You're welcome, Sarah. So I want you to take a few moments to reflect on some ableist language that you know that's part of your everyday vocabulary. And I want you to reflect on why it's there. I want you to reflect on possibly what you can say instead. So I'm going to give you a few moments to do what might not feel comfortable work, but think about some words that you use maybe, or that you hear. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to share in a moment. And it's okay if you don't have words. That's why we're here. And while you're thinking of that, I'm going to press play on here. And all right, so I can't see how many exactly people are here right now because I have a lot of screens on the go. So hopefully it's not too many. How many?
The total is 50. There's 50 people here.
Oh, this should work. This should work. Fantastic. Thanks, Diana. So I want you to either use the QR code or use the Menti code. So go to menti.com and put in 2807774. And you should get something that looks like so. And I want you to share those ableist words so that we can talk about it. And I know this might feel icky, but I think, as we said, these are things that we need to talk about need to see in order to talk about it.
And did you say Menti before? It says Slido on the screen.
Oh, sorry, Slido. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Tom. Slido. I'm used to using Menti. Slido.com.
Me too.
But I can't because this is free and money. All right. So far we have lame and crazy, blind spot, blind 2. Yeah. Ooh, differently abled. I like that. Can I have a conversation about that too? Ooh. Yeah, the things that happen with words. Handicapable. Walk through? Yeah. Oh, this is good. Yes. I see a few other people typing, so I'll give them some. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a lot of different things here that I usually don't see, which is great, actually. I see a couple other people. I see a couple other people typing, so I'll give you another minute or so, and then we'll go back to having a conversation about this. Yes, whoever put sadly the R word seems to be coming back 100%. I've seen a lot of discussion on that on social media. You're right. Okay, so just to start this conversation, what has happened is usually the thing that I usually see happening, which is crazy is kind of the one that's in the center because we have somehow used this as an adjective to mean like a whole bunch of different things, right? Like, how was your day? Crazy, which was just like a stand-in for like actually like busy or like overwhelming or like all of those kinds of things, right? But we're seeing a lot of things in this word cloud that are also like, kind of what Lena's saying in the chat about, taking these kind of portmanteau words and kind of putting things together to get away from saying the word disability, for example, right? Like, so like accessibility or those kinds of things. And I think that it's important that we see these words because there's a lot of them here that I feel, and you can put in the chat if you feel this way too, that maybe you haven't necessarily thought about as being necessarily ableist, like things around like doing a walkthrough, or I know in accessible digital accessibility space, we talk a lot about clicking on things, right? Like with the assumption that people will have fine motor skills to be able to do the clicking, as opposed to things like select, right? Like where like that word is like much more like open. Like if you're asking someone to select a menu item as opposed to click on a menu item, that will allow for people who choose to use mice or any other device to actually do that selecting, right? And so screen readers or their typing or any of those kinds of things. And so I think there's a lot of other things here that are coming up around embodiment that we have as part of our spaces that we don't necessarily think about. So like the assumption that everybody is going to be able to walk through a thing, the assumption that like like at the top, as you may have heard, right? Or what people do sometimes when they do presentations, where it's just like, as you can see on the slide, right? Where like it assumes that everyone can see on the slide, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm out of this word cloud, I'm highlighting some of the words that have been said on this slide, so that if you are someone who cannot see or have low vision, I can still speak to some of the words that are part of this. So thank you so much for those of you who participated in this. I think that it's really important for us to like actually have a conversation about the words that we see, as opposed to like kind of talking around it, right? Like, which is what we do with things like handy capable and those kinds of things. So this brings us to a conversation about intent versus impact, right? Because oftentimes, like I'll use the word crazy, for example. I do these workshops on ableist language at my university. I started off with a pilot in my own teaching and learning center. And that crazy was one of the words that came up a lot. And I was like, oh, okay, so why do we use that? And they're just like, oh, it doesn't mean what you think it means, right? Like we're in Princess Bride or whatever. And so a lot of the conversation that we have around things is just like, well, I don't mean it that way, right? Like crazy doesn't mean what it used to mean like before. Or this other thing, which is like, well, I have a disabled friend and my disabled friend doesn't find it offensive. And so, yeah, or like what Lena's saying, which is like, it was just a joke. And I think that it's important for us to think about, especially in the spaces that we're in the UDL spaces that we're in. We have a lot of mad colleagues We have a lot of folk that work in spaces around mental health and support, and that the words do matter, right? Like it was just a joke. It doesn't cut it anymore, right? And so ableist language and conversations around ableist language is actually a great way to have a conversation about the difference between intent and impact, right? So if you don't mean it that way or whatever, it doesn't change the fact that there's still an impact, right? Like there's still going to be an impact on that, right? So some will hedge that ableist language as in that lack of harmful intent. Like, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to say it in a harmful way. And so I say, well, this is great, but we should have a conversation about, even though, and we have these conversations when we talk about microaggressions, right? Like from a real intersectional lens, that impact is going to be there. That impact will remain regardless of intent, right? And so we need to think about that in a way. So I guess the question is, well, what should I say instead? And so as someone who grew up, I was a teenager in the 90s, ergo the salt and pepper hair, the word crazy was something that we talked about a lot, like to mean like overwhelming and so on. And so I personally had to walk that or remove that out of my own language. And so I said, well, okay, well, how do I train myself to not say those things? How do I train myself to be more inclusive? And so one of the things that I did was I thought about like, okay, well, one is it starts with an acknowledgement that disabilities are not adjectives, right? Like that's a good place to start. And then it moves to an acknowledgement that there are so many other words that you can say that can say what you really want to say that are not ableist, right? So like, did you have an overwhelming day? Are you tired, right? Like, are there things that are happening that just seem like a lot, right? Or you can just make things up that make sense to you and express the kinds of overwhelm that you're feeling, right? So like my people in my CTL now know, and some of them have started adopting that. My go-to is just like, so how's your semester going so far? Or how's your week going so far? I'm just like, you know what? This week, banana sandwiches. Like absolute banana sandwiches. And so like now I have like a whole bunch of people in the office saying banana sandwiches, whereas like they didn't, and to find their own things, right? Like I have a colleague that says giraffes. I was just like, so how's your week this week? So many giraffes, like a ton of giraffes, like a lot of giraffes going on. And I was just like, great. Because it demonstrates the emotion and the overwhelm without having to use an ableist word for that, right? And so you need to find your banana sandwiches, find your giraffes, find your things that'll help support you, right? And one of the things that I often suggest is this great resource, which I'm sure all of you know, but I'll pop in the chat as well, that you've seen because it's been around for many, many years. That is helpful to have people kind of think about the ableist language that they may be using in their spaces. Okay, so that's one thing. So ableist language is one thing. But let's go to the second part of this, which is, okay, so we know that we shouldn't be ableist. We know that we have ableist language. We know that there are other things that we need to put in place that will give the same kind of emotion that we're feeling without using disability as an adjective. But then there are other things that happen, like, socioculturally, geographically, that happen that might be equally biased because of the context. Okay, so here's one example that I'm going to give you. There'll be two. Here's the first one. This student is a tier 3 student, and so designing supports will need to take that into account. Okay. So I see some people doing things. So my question to you is, what assumptions are being made here? So if I'm in a meeting, and somebody says this sentence, I knew Diana wasn't gonna like that. What are some of the assumptions? Okay, so there's like identarian language, yeah. So like you're identifying a student as that. Tara says there's some assumptions about limits and students' capabilities. Let's see what other people say. What other assumptions? See, Sarah knows the people that my bias language example will trigger. So I'm sorry about the activation of my examples. this is so blue-eyed. So look, yeah, the student is so blue-eyed. So look out. Okay. So I think we get the idea, right? Like we really get the idea. But okay, so how about I say this? Which is because I had this conversation with Sarah actually when I was trying to put this together. I couldn't even remember the term that I was remembering. And then Sarah said something and then it made me remember. I was in a session, a UDL session, one of like probably many years ago. And somebody said this, a UDL meeting. And somebody said this. And my PhD is in English. I'm a sensory scholar. So I don't come from special ed. I don't come from, I come to accessibility work through sensory work. Tier 3 means absolutely nothing to me. Like that does not mean anything to me. Like that's a zero. I was just like, tier 3, like, is that like an NCAA term? Like, are they in March Madness? Like, is this like, what is this? Right. So tier 3 means nothing to me. And we have a lot of this that happens in UDL spaces, right? Like people will use these kind of words because they're coming from special ed place. They're coming from ECE place. They're coming from different places. It would be like, I don't know. Yeah. See, and because Naj, you're in Canada. And so exactly, right. And we don't use this here, right? Like that's not something that we use very often. And so that's also why I had trouble remembering it, Naj, because I was just like, I don't even know what the word is. But so this is one of the things that I want to flag in this session is that we often use a lot of words and acronyms like ECE, early childhood education, where we assume that people know what these words mean, like what a tier is, right? And for others, you're just like, I don't know, right? So that's example 1. So thank you I'm sorry for the activation that I've caused, Tara and Diana. So here's the linguistically biased example 2. You're in a webinar and someone has asked for ASL interpretation. The organizers of the event respond to that person and say, there is English cart captions for the event. What are the assumptions that are being made? Tom's doing the lingo in the chat. I love it. Okay, so some are saying all audience members speak English. Rachel's saying there's an assumption that the requester can see or read the captions. The assumption that they know what cart means, exactly that, right? And so Tom has the cart definition in the chat. What else? Dale says the assumption that printed words can capture what's being said. Others? The assumption that an ASL speaker can read written English. That's like 100%, right? Because ASL is its own language, yeah? And so saying, oh, well, I'm sorry, we don't have ASL, but we have captioning. Captioning is not the same as ASL, right? And so we need to think about these assumptions as well, right? Like what are the assumptions that are being made? Regardless of all the acronyms and the things that we have and we're talking about here, I think it's important for us to think about like how we easily try to sub one thing for another thing, especially around accommodations and accessibility, when that is absolutely not the case, right? Like they might need, yeah, exactly. They might need ISL, they might need, LSQ, like they might need something else, right? Absolutely. And then somebody else is like, I was thinking ESL and not ASL, also that, right? Like, so English as a second language learner, there's academe loves acronyms, right? Like, and it also feels very icky that they care so little about the access that they want to sub one thing for another, 100%. So I think we're all in the same space here, right? So what this demonstrates is what I've been talking about a lot. Those of you who know me know that for the past few months now, I've been on a trust kick. I think higher ed is very much on a trust kick right now, and we are very much in a crisis of trust. And so language that we use is very foundational to building that trust, right? Words have meaning as much as we like to ignore it. And so we need to think about how language in and of itself is how we show up for ourselves. It's how we define who we are. It's how we show up for other people, right? And we need to think about the words that we're using and how we're showing up for people. Now, academe in and of itself has a very fraught relationship with language, right? And we just talked about this, like the tier 3, those kinds of things, because there's a lot of contextual, jargony type things, acronyms and so on, that we seem very committed to, right? Like that it's very important that we have like ontological conversations about the, those kinds of things, right? And so I think it's important for us to think about how inclusion is a commitment to plain language over pretense, especially in the universal design for learning spaces that we're in, right? If we care about accessible pedagogy, we need to really invest in saying things in plain language. And this isn't about like whatever we hear, and I'm going to put this in scare quotes, dumbing down things. It's about being inclusive, right? Like it's about using words that the folk, it's finding common ground. It's using words that folk will understand, right? Our language has power embedded, and sadly, it excludes many by the kinds of terms and terminology that we use, right? We're not being inclusive if we're using all these acronyms that other people won't know, right? Which is why I tried to use a lot of acronyms on here to, demonstrate these kinds of like exclusionary things that we do, right? And the feeling of that, right? And also trust means that everyone needs to be able to come to the table in good faith, right? And hold themselves accountable 100%. Thank you so much. I love that very, very much so. So I also have another thing. Let me start this thing now. This is just a fun thing that I thought of one day when I was at home. I'm going to do this with the people. So I want you to go to Slido again and type in 2807774. And as I have on this slide, what I'm saying is, how many of these words do you know? I want you to put the words that you know better at the top and those that you don't know as well at the bottom. Okay, so you have a whole bunch of words here that you're going to rank, words and terms in Slido. I want you to rank the ones that you feel you know the best at the top, and the ones that you have no idea are about towards the bottom. A lot of people from Boston, because look at Duncan getting the top there. This is one thing. The only thing I know about. Yeah. See, look, Rachel, I'm sorry, but like I feel like that's the thing. Like to be honest, Boston's one of my favorite cities. So that's the only reason why I know a lot about Duncan. It's a very walkable city too, which I love. All right. No love for Pret. Pret's one of the, there's. Oh, that's interesting that you say that, Lillian, because a lot of people say that about Montreal or Quebec City for Canada. And I feel like both Boston and Montreal and Quebec City have different vibes. So that's interesting. Yeah, you're right, Lena. Actually, the only time I've ever seen a Pret in the States was actually in Boston. So go Boston for things. So I'll let some of you. Hey, that's down the street. Hi, Stephanie. All right, I'll let some of you continue. All right, so here we're so far. This is what we have. So at the top, coming in strong, a lot of people that are here. There are 50 some odd people that are here. Most of you know Duncan. Then followed by CVS. Then followed by the ADA. Then followed by what I'm drinking right now, Tim Hortons. Then followed by Section 501, then followed by Pret, then followed by the AODA, and then at the bottom, EN 301, 549. Roll Up the Rim just ended, Tom, last week, in fact. So yes, you're just missing it. So the reason why I did this is because, okay, so there's no Duncan in Canada. So I only know of Dunkin' because of Boston. I have no idea what a CVS is, but I see it on TV. We don't have that here either. So I think is it a drugstore? Is it some kind of pharmacy? Yeah, okay, there we go. I know what the ADA is, because y'all talk about it a lot, and I'm glad that some of you know about Tim Hortons. For those of you who don't know Pret, does anyone want to define Pret for people in the chat? Ready to eat, yes, but then like as an entity, what is Pret a Manger? So as I say, I only seen, there we go, Tom with the link. There are a lot of them in England. Exactly. When you're traveling, that's my go-to when I'm in London. What about the AODA? Yeah, their sandwiches are fantastic. Do you know what the AODA is? Have you heard of this before? Yeah, a lot of you are shaking your heads. Tom knows what the AODA is.
Yeah, Accessibility for Ontarians Disability Act.
That's right. So it's the Accessibility Act for the province that I'm in. So that we have a rather robust Accessibility Act that is from the province that I'm in. What about the last one? What about EN 301-549? What is that? It's not launch codes for a spaceship. Have any of you heard of this before? It's going to become, some of you are shaking your heads going like, I have no idea. Anyone? I know somebody. Tom probably also knows this. The European Digital Best Practices, exactly. So this is going to be something, these are going to be words that you're going to need and numbers that you're going to need to know in the future, because this is going to be the European accessibility practices that a lot of folk are going to be beholden to in the future. And so as much as we talk about the ADA and Section 501, I think we need to also remember that if you're in a space that's dealing with a lot of European countries, that this is going to be something that you're going to need to think about going forward. Yes, another thing that you need to think about. So let's tie this all together here. So I really appreciate you participating in this, because like this was an example of how for a lot of you, you knew some things because they're in your periphery, right? And it's about things that you can see and you're being seen. And so if we're going to build trust, it's about being seen and it's about the representation of that, right? So like, what exemplars are we using? What codes and things are we talking about that make people feel seen? Right. So if I'm European and I know that the new European standards are coming in, and I start talking about the EN 501, like that people will know what I'm talking about, right? So we really need to focus on being seen, right? Like that people feel represented. Our language use is a way that people feel seen. It's a way that we represent, right? Like that's how we build representation. So if the words keep representing the same people, right? Then the same structures, then trust stops being even a possibility. And this is kind of where we're at right now. We're seeing the same words, we're seeing the same things being repeated time and again, the same exemplars. And so words stop being a possibility. And so it was my hope that this session would be like an opening up of that possibility of like, oh, there's so many things that I don't know. Because I remember when I was working at one of the community colleges many years ago, I had an associate dean who was fantastic. And whenever was having like an issue about inclusion and those kinds of things, I would go up to her and I'd be like, Maureen, I just don't understand. And she would say to me, Anne, it's because they don't know what they don't know. And I'm like, yeah, they don't know what they don't know, right? And so I think this is kind of where we're at, is like a lot of people just don't know what they don't know. And so we need to start building these conversations so that people do know what they don't know. And so that there's more space to acknowledge different kinds of learners. There's more space to acknowledge like, oh, I really do use a lot of like American examples or, US examples, or, oh, I have no idea what Tim Hortons is. and their superior coffee product, right? Like, that kind of stuff. Like, I have no idea what what these are. So we need to like think about how we acknowledge the different learners in our space and have different examples of things, right? Like different foods even that we talk about in our spaces, right? Like maybe we're going to have a conversation in class about a cheese and bean pupusas. Like, why are we? Let's do it, right? Like, let's talk about different things, right? And so, actually, I have the book right here. I got this book the other day, well, about a month ago. I don't know if any of you have read this book. It's called The Thin Book of Trust. Because we need trust and we need thin now because we have no attention spans. But The Thin Book of Trust. And it's by Charles Feldman. And in it, Feldman talks about these 4 principles, right? That if we want to build trust, we need to have care, we need to have sincerity, we need to have reliability, and we need to show competence. Okay. And so how do we address biases in our use of language using these principles, right? So one is be careful, right? Show care, careful, right? In the ways that we talk and the words that we use, right? So that we address the biases in the language that we have, right? The other thing is sincerity, like be sincere, right? Like, so if you don't know a thing, like be honest about it, be sincere about it and be like, you know what? I don't actually know what this is. Let's learn together, right? And that sincerity is going to show in the kinds of ways and the words that we use, right? The other is reliable. And this is one of the things that, there's a couple of people in this session that know me, that we've worked together on a couple of things. And I think that one thing that the people that do know me in this session could probably agree with is that I have a certain kind of way of being. And I see some of you are nodding your heads, the people that do know me. And that reliably, if you're coming to an AND session, reliably, like an AND session is going to feel exactly what this session feels like, right? Like I am reliably the kind of person that says the things that people don't want to hear. And so, but a lot of that is about that, right? Like a lot of that reliability in terms of addressing our biases is that knowing that you're going to bring the things that you need to bring to the spaces that we're in, right? And then the last piece is competence, right? And I think that we're also in a bit of a crisis of competence, right? Like that people think like, oh, well, I'm just going to put it into the robot and it's going to come out and do the things that need to be done. But we need to demonstrate our competence by like learning about the things that we don't know and then coming back with like more inclusive language and coming back with more inclusive exemplars and those kinds of things, right? So great book, really applicable to a lot of the UDL principles that are there. So to end, I have a couple of reflective prompts here that are based on the conversations that we've had. So here are some. Is this something that only someone in the United States would know, like CVS, for example? What decisions am I making about spelling conventions, right? So like we can go on forever about this thing, right? We can go on forever about color and color and the U and neighbor. Like what assumptions am I making about spelling conventions? What sort of acronyms am I assuming that people are going to use? And so shout out to Tom for putting all my acronyms in the chat as well. What kind of exemplars am I using in this course? Are they exemplars that are only applicable to certain people? And is this an ableist word or phraseology that I can avoid, right? Center, yes, the E-R-E-R-E. Are there other words, are there other prompts that you think, based on the conversation that we've had so far, that we should ask? So is this something that's kind of geographically bound? Is this something that says something about spelling conventions in different Englishes? Are there too many acronyms? What about the exemplars? Is this ableist? Do you have any other is this sense-based phrasing? Yes, exactly. We talked about walking and clicking. Absolutely. Is there cultural knowledge that I'm assuming that people have that they might not? Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeannie. Any others? I think those are 2 great ones right there. on top of this that we can add to the thing. Yeah. Is this medical language as opposed to lived experience language? Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Cool. So that's me with a couple of minutes for questions and stuff. But thank you so much for sharing space with me. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see faces and names and such. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And thank you for letting me chat with y'all today, Diana.
So if people have questions, let's spend a few minutes. If they do, and Rob, maybe while people are still here, if you want to add the links back in the chat. Okay, so for those of you that have been here before, we have everything for these sessions. We put it on a Padlet, and there is a YouTube channel where you can find last year's sessions and this year's sessions, and Rob pasted information in the chat. So I want to thank you, Anne. This was great. Being a person that just spent a lot of my life messing around in the disability world, I'll say it that way, and growing up with a grandmother that was severely vision impaired. And other close friends. So I really appreciate the emphasis today. I don't know if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, please do so. Really, really great session. And
thank you.
Really appreciate you giving, everybody who's still here, people are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts.
That's right.
And for the love of the passion for making sure we have inclusive settings, right? Right?
Yeah.
Tom? Yeah. All right. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Anne. And if we can return the favor someday, we would be happy.
Yeah, come on up. I'm in wine country. If any of you ever want to come to wine country, you can come and spend some time here. It'd be great.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Have a great day.